Welcome. We'll start in another couple minutes, just see if a couple more people will trickle in. But in the meantime, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you're joining from and what you hope to study in grad school, etc. All right, maybe let's get started. We're a super small group, so welcome Shari and Winter. It's just you guys, so I'll really invite you to participate a lot today. Let me know that you can hear me, and if you're present, by just saying hi in the chat, either to both of us or just to me. But especially since we're such a small group, I would love to check in and see that you guys are here and hear from you. Hi, Winter. Winter, what are you hoping to study in graduate school? Oh, and hi, Deepika. Great to see you as well. Cool. Awesome. Hi, Deepika. So nice to see you again. Hi, Shari. Mario just joined. Welcome. Welcome, everybody. My name is Rina, and we have a math session tonight, and we're going to be covering positives and negatives, and we'll see a couple of problems, go over the core rules. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself before we begin. I've taught with Manhattan Prep since 2012, and I actually started as an LSAT teacher, and then I moved into GRE. And I'm a current graduate student, so you can see I'm in a classroom right now. I'm coming at you from being a graduate student, so I can really relate to the anxiety and difficulty of preparing to apply to graduate school and going through that process. It's really vulnerable, it's really brave, especially, or just differently, but for me, I was coming back to school after a long time away, and it was like, oh, wow, I'm putting myself out there to be judged, and it was really stressful. So a lot of sympathy to you guys out there. So let's dive in. I'm going to screen share and we're going to see some slides and we'll see some problems, and I'll share the agenda for tonight. In the session, it's going to be an hour altogether, but our content will run for 45 to 50 minutes, and then we'll do some Q&A at the end, and I'll hear what questions you guys have. So positives and negatives is what we're covering, as I mentioned before, and we'll see a range of questions, quantitative comparison, multiple choice, select all that apply. We'll start by going over the core rules though, and then we'll think about how to apply them in these different ways. The questions that we're going to see tonight are from the 5-pound book of problems, and this is a book that Manhattan Prep has put out. And it's a great book with lots and lots of practice problems in it, thousands of practice problems, in fact. So that's a great resource. That's where I'm pulling these problems from tonight. And it's a great resource for you to check out in your studies as well. So as I said, we're studying positives and negatives tonight. So I'm going to give you guys a minute or so, and I want you just to think about these rules here and see if on your own page you can answer the questions. And the answer is it positive, negative, or it depends would be our 3 possible answers here. So take a moment, just think about this. And then I'll share our core rules and we'll think about applying them, but I'll give you guys a minute to begin. All right, and I'm going to go over, I'm just going to stop my timer here, but I'm going to go over our answers here of combining positive and negative numbers. Actually, I should say as an aside, what are positive and negative numbers? it's a sort of conceptual problem, but with when I'm dealing with positives and negatives, I love to envision a number line. So maybe I'll start with just this sort of framework here. And if we have our number line with 0, and let's say we're just dealing with whole numbers, integers, I'm going to put those on my number line here. And all the positive numbers are the ones to the right of 0. It's like I've got 2 apples, 3 apples, etc. And my negative numbers are the ones to the left of 0. You know, like I owe 1 apple, I owe 2 apples, I owe 3 apples to the store. And anything the more to the left of the number line we are, the more to the left of 0, that's smaller. So like -4 is smaller than -1. The more negative we get, the more like in debt, or yeah, the more we have a gaping hole of apples. That's the smaller the number is. And as we go to the right, it's bigger. So what happens when we combine these positive and negative numbers? Well, putting 2 positives together, if apples and then more apples, stays positive. I've got even more apples. Putting 2 negatives together, it stays negative. If I owe 2 apples and then I owe 4 more apples, you know, I owe 6 apples, it'll stay negative. Now, positive plus negative, it depends. And it depends on the magnitude of each of those numbers and how far it is from 0. So let's see an example. 5 plus -1 is going to be greater than 0. Whereas 1 plus -5 is going to be less than 0. So the 5 unit, or the -5, farther away from 0 in the number line than the 1 or the -1. So it'll carry the day. So the one that has that like bigger distance is going to carry it. When we're dealing with multiplication, positive times a positive is going to stay positive. Now, 2 negatives come together and make a positive. And I think about this like, the way I remember it is I think of like, if there's 2 sad people, they find each other and find love, that's a positive result. That's a positive outcome. So 2 negatives come together and make the positive. But if we have a positive and a negative, it'll stay negative. So if we have our 1 sad person, 1 negative, it stays negative. We don't have that positive outcome yet. So if we have an odd number of negatives, that means they can't all pair up, it'll stay negative. Now, this has a good application, or an interesting application, to exponents. So we'll see, we want to be looking at the even or oddness of an exponent, and exponents tell us like how many copies of a number we have. So if we have an even exponent, we have an even number of copies of the base of whatever that number is we're multiplying, our final result is going to be positive or 0. 0 in the case where the base itself was 0. Because all, you know, even if our base was negative, they're all going to come together to make positives. They're all going to find a pair. If we have the positive base, it'll stay positive. But if we have an odd power, it's going to keep the charge, the positive negativeness of its base. So a positive number multiplied many times over stays positive. Negative number multiplied an odd number of times stays negative, because not every single negative has a pair. We're going to have an odd one out at the end. So we want to look for that as an interesting way the GRE is going to tell us about positives and negatives. We want to look for those even and odd exponents. So let's see where we are so far, right? If we see greater than 0 and less than 0, we want to think about positives, negatives, and we're going to make inferences by looking for exponents as we go. So let's try applying this to a question. I'm going to give you guys 2 minutes with this one. Go ahead and dive in, and private chat me your answer when you have it. So send it just to me, just to the panelists when you have it. Okay, go for it. All right, let's discuss. So the first thing I'm noticing here is that I see greater than 0 and less than 0, and that is important GRE code for positive and negative. So the first thing on my page that I want to do is I want to note that important inference, right? So I'm getting out my highlighter here, right? When I see less than 0 and I see greater than 0, I'm thinking this means this whole thing is negative. And this means this whole thing is positive. So I'm thinking, okay, GRE is telling me positives and negatives. That's also what it's going to be testing on. So I want to think about making inferences about positives and negatives. So let's start by looking at this bottom statement here, right? And we often have these upfront information on these questions. And an important note is both are going to be true simultaneously. Like all that upfront information, they're telling you all this stuff is true. But I'm going to start with the bottom one because like negative, that feels a little juicy. I'm like, what can I figure out in this juicy situation? So type into the chat to everybody. So type to everybody. What, on that bottom statement, what can we infer about the positive negativeness of X and Y and Y? So what can we infer? What do you guys think? Go ahead and type it into the chat to everybody so that we can see. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of agreement here, right? X is negative. Now someone chime in with Y. I think Deepika is getting at it, right? Squaring it's going to give positive, right? Okay, very good. So good. So let's give a little more flavor to that. How do we know X is negative? I totally agree with you guys, but how do we know? How do we get there? So type that in as well. How did you figure out that X is negative? Awesome. Okay, Marvin says Y is squared, so it's going to be positive. So X must be negative to get everything to be less than 0. Fantastic. Now note, remember, something squared is going to be positive or 0 generally, but in this case, we know the whole expression is less than 0, not less than or equal to. So neither X nor Y are going to be 0 because if either of them could be 0, it would have turned the whole thing to be less than or equal to. So, right, the Y squared, that squared thing is going to be positive. So if that's positive, where's our whole, how can our whole phrase be negative? X has to be negative. Very good inferences that everybody's having here. So we know that X is negative. We can bring the same logic to the top statement where, okay, maybe X is negative, but this whole squared chunk here is going to be positive. And then I'm thinking, okay, it's positive, but the whole phrase is positive too. This whole expression, X squared Y. So for that whole thing to stay positive, then the Y must be positive. So Y has got to be positive because again, that whole expression is positive. So if Y were negative, it would have flipped everything negative. So X is negative, Y is positive. That means that B must be our right answer, because whatever numbers X and Y are, any negative is going to be less than a positive. Let's remember our number line. Our negative numbers more to the left, they are going to be less than our positive numbers to the right. So B here is our right answer. Y is positive, X is negative. So Y must be greater than X. All right, I'm going to pause here. Type into the chat if you have any questions on this one here. Okay, if you have questions, type them in. I'm going to keep going, but we're going to keep practicing this. So I'm again going to summarize here where we are so far. If we see less than 0, greater than 0, that's GRE code for positive and negative. Then I'm going to try to make inferences. When I see that, I'm going to make inferences about the positives and negativeness of the number. I'm looking for, is it an even? Is it an odd power? I'm thinking about, do the signs have to be the same or different? Let's apply this to another similar question, same sort of set of ideas, but a different question. So here's another question, go for it. And again, private chat me your answer, send it just to hosts and panelists when you've got it, go for it. All right, let's discuss. So I noted up here again, I'm translating this idea of less than zero and greater than zero, reminding myself it means positive and negative. And again, I want to start with my more juicy looking statement. So this time I'm going to start with my bottom statement because, oh, I see that squared. That looks kind of juicy. So again, type to everybody, type to everyone, what can we infer from the bottom statement? Very good, right? C is positive. So the B squared chunk is positive. The whole phrase stays positive. That means C must be positive. So C is positive. We have an excellent inference here. Now I look at my top phrase here and I'm like, okay, C is positive. This whole thing is negative. That means like, okay, maybe A or B is negative, but they're probably not both negative, but I don't know which one is negative, right? So maybe then I'm thinking like, is it D, because I don't know if A or B are negative. Maybe, one of them's negative, but I don't know which one. But in fact, in this case, B is our right answer. So you guys tell me, like, how can I know that AB is less than 0 when I don't know whether A or B are positive or negative? So enter that into the chat. How can I nevertheless answer that question, even though I don't individually know whether A or B is positive or negative? One could be one could be the other. How can we still answer the question here? Mario, well said, right? The whole term AB must be negative, right? So I'm like, okay, I don't know what they are individually, but this chunk, I'm seeing this chunk here. I know that C, this part is positive. So for this whole ABC situation to become negative, then that AB term, this AB chunk must be turning the thing negative. Okay, very good, right? So our right answer here is B. This whole chunk here has to be negative. Even though I don't know which one alone is negative, that whole chunk has to be negative. Excellent work. Okay, so B is our right answer here. I'm making inferences and I can look at these entire chunks as we go. Now, as you guys are studying, I recommend making these decoding flashcards and making the kinds of inferences we've been practicing so far. So if I see, something like XY is greater than 0, I'm going to think on the back of my flashcard, positives and negatives. And I'm going to think, oh, if I see this chunk is greater than 0, that tells me they're the same sign. They're either both positive or both negative. Or if I see this chunk, this whole term is less than 0, I'm thinking they're different signs. So I can think about what is the code that the GRE is giving me, and I can think about these whole phrases and these whole chunks. So let's practice that for just a moment. I'll give you guys, let's say 1 minute, and I want you to think, let's say these were your flashcards. What would be the inferences you would make about ABC and PQR on your paper? What are the inferences you could make? And then I'll talk through them. Go for it on your own. So if I see something like this on the GRE on my flashcard, for the first one, I'm going to note, right? Okay, less than 0, we're thinking positives and negatives. All of our even exponents must be positive, but it's negative overall. That means that A must be negative. So I'm inferring that A is negative. For the second one, I know that the Q to the 4th power chunk is going to be positive. We have that even exponent, and the whole phrase is positive. Now, I can't figure out if P and R are positive and negative or negative, but I can figure out that they must be the same sign. They have that odd power, that odd exponent that keeps the charge, the positive negativeness of the base. So if both P and R are negative, then coming together, my 3 P's and 5 R's is going to turn positive. Or if they're both positive, my 3 P's and 5 R's will come together and stay positive. So whatever they are, they must be the same sign. So that's the kind of inference I would make here. All right, what questions do you guys have at this point? Otherwise, we'll go on and do another question, but want to see if you guys have any questions. I'll pause and see if any come in the chat. All right, great work so far, my friends. Let's do another question here. Go for it. All right, well, I'm seeing fewer answers coming in. So first question I have for you guys is, what makes this one harder? And I'll ask a follow-up too. So what makes this one harder? And what clues can we use to help begin? So go ahead and share in the chat what makes it hard, but what can we grab onto here? What tells us, what gives us some information that we can hold on to here? Okay, Claire is saying even versus odd exponents. How do we know that there are even and odd exponents? Because it's not like the last ones where it was like to the second, to the fourth, etc. So how do we know that there are even and odd exponents here? And Claire, I agree, there are, but how can we recognize that? How can we spot that? Okay, great decoding there, Mario, right? So 2n, this is another piece of good GRE code. 2n, that's code for even. So 2 times any number, and n we know is a positive integer. So 2 times any positive integer is going to be even. Like even numbers have a factor of 2 in them, right? But if we add 1 to it, 2n plus 1, that's going to be odd. So we can think of some examples, right? We can have 2, let's say, 2, 4, 6, that's like 2 times 1, 2 times 2, 2 times 3, and so on, right? 2 times a number, but then we add 1, all of them are even, but we add 1 and we get 3, we get 5, we get 7. So what happens when we add 1 to our 2n? It turns odd. So we have an important decoding here that this is going to be even power, but this over here, 2n plus 1, is going to be an odd power. So what that means is this whole chunk here is going to be positive because we have a -1 to an even power. Every single -1 finds its negative buddy and we get that positive outcome. So they all have a pair, we get the positive outcome. So that means this whole term here is positive and it's going to be times another positive, which means my entirety of quantity A will be positive. Now, on the other hand, quantity B, 7 to any power is going to stay positive. Remember, n is a positive integer, so we're raising 7 to the first, the second, the third, et cetera, power. It's going to stay positive, but our -3 is going to be raised to an odd power, so it's going to be negative. So our positive, in this case, times our negative. Our negative doesn't have a buddy to pair up with. It's still left alone. That whole expression is going to be negative. So my entirety of quantity A is positive. My entirety of quantity B is negative. We know a positive is greater than a negative. That means that quantity A is our correct answer here. So we have this other layer of code to look out for of 2n or 2n plus 1, hiding that they're giving us these even odd exponents a little bit, putting a little bit of a veil over that. But we want to still recognize that code and see, I can make inferences about evens and odds. Okay, great work, friends. I'm going to summarize where we are so far, and then we'll think about some multiple choice questions. So what we've seen so far, less than 0, greater than 0, every time you see that, that's a bright light telling you we're testing positives and negatives here. When you see that, you want to start to make inferences. Before I dive in and plug in numbers or things like that, I want to think, okay, well, what can I figure out about the positives and negatives? Looking for exponents, are they even or odd? Looking for signs that must be the same or different than one another. To practice, you can make those noticing flashcards. So when I see blah, 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 I will think or do da, da, da. We want to look for coded even and odd, such as 2n or 2n plus 1. And we can plug in easy numbers to test. So if I'm like, on this last question, I'm like, what do I even do? I don't know where to begin. I could start by plugging in numbers for n, and maybe that would help me to see, quantity A is going to be positive, quantity B is going to be negative. So we can always make things concrete by trying to plug in numbers. So let's apply this to a multiple choice question. This is one of our regular multiple choices where there's going to be only one right answer. So go for it. I'm going to give you guys 2 minutes for this one here. And again, if you have an answer, go ahead and send it to me in private chat. All right, let's discuss this one now. Note here, we have another component. It's not just negatives and positives, but also greater than 1. So not just any positive number, but like positive number that's bigger than 1 here. So we'll get to that in a moment. But first I want to think, okay, they're giving me information about X and Y in these different ways. They tell me in language, X is a non-zero integer, Y is greater than 0, less than 1. Type to everybody. What's an example of, what could X be and what could Y be? For example, X could be negative 1,000, right? So give us some examples of what X and Y could be here. Now, I don't agree, Mario, that X could be 1/2. Winter, I agree that Y could be, don't mean to call you out on the spot. You've given us so much great information, right? But no, X is a non-zero integer. So X is going to be a whole number. So it's a whole number. It could be 1. It could be, as Deepika is saying, it could be positive or negative, right? It could be -1. It could be -10. It could be 115. And Winter's saying Y could be, 0.5, right? Y is positive in a fraction is how Deepika is saying, right? So it could be 0.5, it could be 3/4, it could be 0.7 repeating, like 0.77777, and so on and so forth, right? So, okay, what must be greater than 1? Now, something that might be helpful here is we can also plug in numbers. So let's say, let's call X, let's say X is going to be -1. Let's make X negative to make this a little bit spicy because we're trying to get that positive bigger than 1 result. We want to make things a little bit challenging for ourselves by making X negative. And let's make Y 1/2. So plugging in numbers can be a great way to go. Plug in simple numbers. So X is -1, that's not greater than 1. So A doesn't have to be true. Then I'm thinking, okay, right, negative and a positive together, that's going to stay negative. So X over Y, that's going to stay negative. We've got -1 over 1/2. Now, by the way, when we divide by a fraction, we want to multiply by reciprocal. Reciprocal. So what that means here, in answer choice B here, we'd have -1 divided by 1/2. In other words, that would be -1 times 2 over 1. So we multiply by that flipped over fraction, but we're multiplying again a negative by a positive, that'll stay negative. So B is out. C, again, the 1/2 squared stays positive, but the X is still negative. We've got a negative times a positive, it stays negative. So A, B, and C are out. Now D and E are all going to turn positive because we have that nice even power that will take our negative X and make it positive. Now X squared is going to be 1. So our choice D here is going to be 1 times 1/2 because our negative turned positive, but that is not greater than 1. That's still a fraction here. So by process of elimination, we could get to E, but let's just double check here. So it's going to be 1 divided by 1/2, but let's remember when we divide by a fraction, we multiply by the reciprocal. So it'll be 1 times 2, that's going to equal 2. And indeed, it's going to be greater than 1. So we have that nice positivized even power. And when we divide by a fraction, we're going to be multiplying by a bigger number instead. So it will become bigger, it will be greater than 1. So our right answer choice here is E. We can use a process of elimination. We can think conceptually, or we can plug in numbers. And here we're adding in the component of fractions. All right, great work, everybody. I have one more multiple choice question for you, and then we'll pause for questions. And this next one is going to be a select all that apply. So more than one answer could be right. You want to evaluate each answer on its own rather than using a process of elimination. Okay, here it is. Go for it. All right, and again, send me your answer in private chat if you haven't done so yet. Curious where you guys are at with this one. So I look at this inequality here that's telling me, okay, C minus D is greater than C. So we subtract D. So we're taking something away. We take something away and C gets bigger. So what can we infer from that? What can we infer from this? Good, Marvin, right? D has to be negative. We've taken away our debts. So now we're richer, right? In other words, when we subtract a negative, it turns positive. We have that double negative again, it becomes positive. So we can infer that D is negative. And look, that's one of our answers. In fact, D is less than 0. In other words, D is negative. That is indeed one of our answers. Now, does C have to be greater than 0? Does C have to be positive? No, it does not. So we could even think of an example here. We could say, let's say C is -1 and D is -2. In this case, -1 minus -2 is going to be +1. That is indeed greater than -1, like, oops, greater than. C does not need to be positive for this whole expression to work. C could be negative or positive. So A does not have to be correct. I'm going to cross that one out. Now we can also think about this algebraically. So let's say for choice B, so C minus D is greater than C. I could add D to both sides. And then I get C is greater than C plus D. Oh my goodness, ding, ding, ding. That's what our answer choice C says. That's correct. I could also take it a step further and subtract C from both sides. And then I get D on the right side is going to be less than, and C minus C, anything minus itself, is going to be 0. So I end up with, I have simplified down to my answer choice B. So I can algebraically also get to B and C. A, I can't get to, I can't get rid of that minus D here. I can't get rid of the D altogether to get us down to C alone to make inferences about C. So B and C are right answers. We can think about it conceptually, or we can think about it algebraically. By the way, C, if we think about it conceptually, if we are adding a negative, it's like doing subtraction. We're adding some debt. That means we're getting smaller. So we're going to be less than what we started with. Okay, so again, B and C are our right answers. So let me summarize where we've gone. So whenever we see greater than 0 and less than 0, we're thinking positive and negative. Then you're making inferences as you go, looking for exponents, even or odds, looking for signs that have to be the same or different. Practice making noticing flashcards. We added some code for even and odd, 2n or 2n plus net 1, and you can plug in easy numbers to test like we did on these multiple choice questions to help get through them. Okay, those were all the questions that I have for you guys today. I want to let you know that we have some upcoming courses that you can find out on our website, so check that out there. I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing, and I'll stick around to answer any questions you have about your individual studies, what we covered today, your path to taking the GRE. If you're like such a jet and don't have questions, you can go ahead and enjoy the rest of your night, and so great to see you. But I will stick around for anyone who has additional questions or just want to chat about your studies. So yeah, and if you have a question, by the way, just go ahead and type it into the chat. I'm not sure about the mic function in the webinar, so just type your questions into the chat if you have any. Thanks, Winter. I'm not seeing any questions come in, so I'll give it another 1 minute, but, oh, great. Okay, Shari has a question. Okay, so asking, right, like haven't done math in a long time. How can I catch up and feeling behind from that, right? I would suggest start with, well, there's a couple of great resources out there. So in terms of some Manhattan Prep resources that I would recommend, I'm just going to type this into the chat to everybody. Oh, thanks, Deepika. That's really sweet. I would say Math Strategies book is really a good one to start with. That's a Manhattan Prep book. Also our Interact videos, I really love them. I'm gonna just like star that. I love them. They are really helpful and I think really clear, and they're interactive videos that adapt to you based on the answers you put in. So if you get it right, it'll be like, here's a challenge question. If you get it wrong, it'll go back and do more review depending on how you sort of answer. So I really, really recommend those videos. Another great free resource that's out there is Khan Academy. That's a repository, unrelated to Manhattan Prep, but of amazing free videos on all kinds of topics, including everything that's covered on the GRE. It's not phrased in terms of the GRE, it's like phrased in terms of like high school math, but Khan Academy is great. So Khan Academy videos are free. Our Interact videos are not free. There is like a freemium trial of them where you can see a section of them for free that you could see to see if you like it, and then maybe purchase access to more of it if you like it. But I really love those as a great place to start. So I would recommend Khan Academy. Our Interact videos and the Math Strategies book are great. Okay, Claire is showing the noticing flashcards again. Absolutely. Let me pull those back up. Okay, so Claire, by the noticing flashcards, they mean like this. So where, on the front, so it's sort of the code. They're like, oh, the test maker said XY is greater than 0. XY is less than 0. So that's what I'll put on the front of the flashcard. But then on the back, I'm like, what am I going to think, right? Oh, I'm like, ooh, positives, negatives. And if it's greater than 0, that means they are, X and Y are the same sign. They're either two negatives that are getting that positive result, or they're two positives. But if they're less than 0, that means they're different signs. It means, one is negative and one is positive. I don't know which is which. So I'm putting the sort of the information on the front, and on the back, I'm putting the inferences and what I can get from it. Thank you, Deepika. Okay, so Marvin asks, is there significant difference between the GRE Prep and GRE for MBA? It is not that significant. The GRE for MBA class has a little bit more of the emphasis on the math section. It has an additional session that focuses on the math content. And the sort of idea there is that MBA programs value the quantitative score more than, let's say, an English degree might, so of course, different programs value different things. So there's a little bit more of the math focus on the GRE for MBA. Okay, Deepika says, I am thinking of taking the GRE in 4 weeks. What resources can I use? Deepika, I say the same thing that I said above. Our strategy books, the Interact videos, and Khan Academy are great resources. Maybe I'll add to that. Go to the ETS website. So the ETS is the makers of the GRE, and they have a ton of great free stuff on there. They have 2 free practice tests. They have like the sample essay questions. It's not going to give you all of your study resources. I would look to our strategy guides, interactivities, et cetera, for that, but it's a really good place to start for taking a practice test, for seeing some sample questions. It's not like a ton of sample questions that they have in there, but I think that's a great place to start as well. Shari, do you have a link for the interactive videos? Let me see if I can find. Okay, here we go. I'm putting it in the chat right here. That's the link for the interactive videos. Again, as I mentioned, those ones aren't free, but you can try it for free for a limited time, a chunk of them. So I would recommend checking that out. What else? Well, I'll say to everybody also, all these free prep hours that we have are all on our YouTube channel. So I'll pull up the link to our YouTube channel too. They're all recorded on the YouTube. So that's super helpful because we've been doing them for years. So it covers it covers basically the whole thing, it covers the whole test. So let me find that link as well to our YouTube page, because I think that's really, really helpful. Make sure this is the right one. Yes. Okay, great. Any favorite prep hours? Claire, honestly, I haven't seen them all. So I would go through and, the topics are all like listed. So I would just go and do the ones that you are on topics that you need to focus on the most. I don't necessarily have any favorites that I think are better than others, but I would just focus on the topics that are most important to you. Other questions? Claire, so top types of math questions. A challenge of the math section is that it does cover a range of things, you know what I mean? So it does have sort of breadth. So stuff we did today, number properties around positives, negatives, divisibility and primes, things like that definitely are tested. So you should aim to feel comfortable about sort of number properties, again, like positives and negatives. So number properties, exponents, algebra, but like basic algebra. So I wouldn't worry about, don't worry about quadratics. Quadratics are definitely tested, but if we're talking like most important, most commonly tested, right? You're sort of like, no exponents in those equations. And geometry, you'll probably see 3-ish questions per section. And maybe I would add also like averages / percents are tested as well pretty frequently, especially in like the data interpretation section, the charts and graphs section. So those would be the big topics that I would make sure to cover. No problem. All right, friends, thank you so much for joining tonight. I'm not seeing any other questions come in, so I'm going to go ahead and close out in a moment, but so great to see you all, and thank you so much. Have a great rest of your evening.